Chapter 1. Rusty the Squirrel Finds Trouble. Rusty the little red squirrel had spent the whole morning grumbling. Nothing interesting ever seemed to happen in the woods. No excitement, no action. Feeling mischievous, he decided to stir things up by pestering Grumbles the Raccoon, who was trying to nap in the sunshine. Rusty teased and taunted, calling silly names from a high branch, laughing as Grumbles growled in annoyance. Oh, how fun it had been. After all, Rusty knew perfectly well that Grumbles couldn't catch him, not with those clumsy paws and that round belly. But now the situation had turned upside down. Rusty had all the drama he could handle, and much, much more than he'd ever wanted. The truth was painfully clear. He was running for his life. Yes, really. There's nothing quite as terrifying as knowing you're in real danger. Just ask Thistle the hare. She's had her fair share of close calls, darting from hungry foxes, and even dodging the terrible howl of the farm dog, Buster. But Thistle always had somewhere to run, under the thorn bushes, behind the stone piles, or deep into the bramble where sharp twigs kept big predators out. That tiny flicker of safety made all the difference when fear filled her chest. Rusty, however, had no such flicker, no comfort, no haven. Just panic pounding in his chest as he darted from branch to branch, glancing behind him. And who was behind him? None other than Flicker the Weasel, silent, swift, and staring with fiery, hungry eyes. Unlike Grumbles, Flicker was slim enough to follow Rusty into tight spaces and silent enough to creep without warning. Rusty's usual bolt holes, the cozy nook in the oak, the snug cracks in the old rock wall, wouldn't protect him this time. Flicker could reach them too, and Rusty knew it. So instead of heading toward home, Rusty veered away into unfamiliar trees, dodging through unfamiliar branches, running without a plan. The only thought in his mind was, don't stop. Where was he going? He didn't know. What would he do if Flicker caught up? He didn't want to think about it. Oh no, he gasped, his chest burning as he darted onto a high limb and prepared to leap. Why couldn't I just keep quiet? Why did I have to be so noisy? If only he had stayed silent, Flicker might never have noticed him. If only. Rusty's tiny paws slipped slightly as he landed on another tree limb. He was starting to feel it. The ache in his legs, the sting in his lungs. He couldn't keep this up much longer. Up ahead, a wide gap loomed between the trees. The next branch was far, maybe too far, but Flicker was gaining, and Rusty had no choice. Rusty had made jumps like this before. Wide, daring, wild. On a normal day, he would have barely noticed the gap, but this wasn't a normal day. His legs trembled, and every breath felt heavier than the last. What once seemed easy now looked impossible. The space between the two trees stretched before him like a canyon. He couldn't risk climbing down and racing across the forest floor. Flicker would have him in seconds. There was no time to think. Rusty inhaled deeply, dug his claws into the bark for grip, then dashed across the branch with every ounce of speed he had left. He launched himself into the air, heart pounding, hoping, just hoping, his tiny paws would find something solid. They did, barely. His fingers brushed against the edge of a branch in the next tree. He clung to it with all his might, but the force of the jump and his exhaustion were too much. His grip failed. Rusty plummeted. Down he tumbled through the air, wind rushing past his ears. Instinctively, he spread his limbs wide, trying to slow himself. It helped, but only a little. With a thud, he hit the ground. For a second, maybe two, everything felt silent. His chest didn't move. His eyes blinked slowly. The world spun. Then, movement. He gasped, then coughed, and finally pulled in a shaky breath. His body ached, but nothing seemed broken. The fall had taken nearly everything from him, but not his will to survive. Without hesitation, he forced his sore legs to move, dragging himself upright. He didn't even glance back to see if Flicker was watching. Rusty scrambled up the nearest tree, claws scraping bark, leaves brushing against his face. Somehow, he was still alive, and that was enough, for now. End of Chapter 2. Rusty clung to the trunk, panting, his fur bristling and his heart thudding so loudly he could hardly hear the wind in the leaves. His legs ached, his sides burned, but up he climbed, higher, safer, at least for now. Above him, the branches thickened, forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. This part of the forest felt different, older, quieter, unfamiliar. He realized, as he rested on a thick limb and looked around, that he had run far from the woods he knew. Gone were the familiar trees with their knotholes and bark scars. Gone were the scents of his favorite hiding spots, or the chatter of neighboring squirrels. This place was silent, still. Even the birds didn't sing here. Rusty swallowed hard. His chase had taken him into a part of the forest he'd never dared explore. He didn't even know which direction home was anymore. But one thing was certain: Flicker the Weasel hadn't caught him. Not yet. He listened carefully, ears twitching. No snapping twigs, no rustling leaves, just his own heavy breathing. Was he safe? Maybe. Maybe not. Carefully, he crept along the branch and settled into the crook where it met the trunk. He tucked his legs beneath him and let his eyes scan every shadow. "I should have never teased Grumbles," he whispered to himself. Not ever. If he had just kept his voice down, kept out of trouble like his mother had always told him, he wouldn't be lost in some strange part of the forest, sore and scared. But regrets wouldn't help him now. He had to rest, just for a little while. The sky above had begun to shift, the light softening into late afternoon. The air was cooler here, and the wind brought scents Rusty didn't recognize. Damp moss, strange bark, unfamiliar creatures. Whatever this place was, it wasn't home. And somehow, he knew he wouldn't be finding his way back easily. As his eyes began to close, Rusty promised himself something. If he got out of this mess, if he ever saw his cozy tree and the sunny patch near the brook again, he'd think twice before causing trouble just for fun. He'd learned something today, something important. But for now, he let his body rest. Because tomorrow he'd have to figure out how to survive in a forest that didn't know his name. Rusty awoke with a start. Something had moved below. The last rays of sunlight flickered through the treetops as twilight began to settle in. For a moment, he couldn't tell if he had dreamed the sound, but then he heard it again. A faint rustle, slow and deliberate. Flicker. Rusty froze, barely breathing. Every muscle tensed. He waited, his eyes wide in the dim light, scanning the ground far beneath the branches. A shadow moved, but it wasn't the sleek, slinking shape of the weasel. It was larger, rounder. Then he heard a grunt. "Grumbles?" Rusty whispered. The raccoon's familiar shape shuffled into view, sniffing at the base of a tree nearby. Rusty's heart leapt with a strange mix of joy and dread. Grumbles had followed the scent, probably still annoyed, maybe even still a little angry. But maybe, just maybe, he wasn't here to scold. Rusty scampered a little lower and called out softly, Hey, it's me." Grumbles looked up, blinked slowly, then muttered, "You again? I didn't mean to bother you earlier," Rusty said quickly. I just wanted something to do, but I messed everything up. I think I'm lost." Grumbles scratched behind his ear. "You think?" Rusty sighed, then added, "And I think Flicker was chasing me." That made the raccoon's ears perk up. He looked around more carefully now, sniffed the air, then motioned with his nose. "Climb down. Stay quiet." Rusty obeyed without hesitation. Grumbles didn't speak again until they were moving together through the woods, silent as they could be. The raccoon led the way, nose to the ground, stopping often to check their surroundings. It wasn't long before Rusty recognized the familiar scent of pine and the sound of trickling water nearby. They were getting close to home. Finally, they reached the clearing, where Rusty's favorite tree stood tall, its branches familiar, its bark worn smooth by years of climbing. He was home, safe. He turned to thank Grumbles, but the raccoon was already waddling away, muttering something about noisy squirrels and their trouble. Rusty climbed slowly up to his branch, curled into his nest of leaves, and took a deep breath. He was exhausted, sore, but safe, and now he knew. Adventure might seem exciting when you're bored, but there's a big difference between fun and foolishness. Next time, he'd think twice before waking a raccoon or shouting nonsense just to feel important. As the moon rose over the trees and the forest returned to its quiet rhythm, Rusty, the red squirrel, finally closed his eyes, not with fear, but with gratitude.